What an odd fellow. I think it would be pretty funny if it had
childhood trauma.
Oh damn. So, let's talk YouTube. Over 3 years ago, I uploaded a video titled Welcome to the Channel, where I introduced myself as Lubba Fanatic and discussed the channel's mission statement of proving myself as a competent audio-video producer by using my skills to create retrospective video essays about the games I play. I own Celeste. If you followed me for any amount of time on any platform I've been on, then you're probably aware that Super Mario Galaxy 2 is one of my favorite things ever. And Lubba, who takes on Rosalina's role from the first game as Mario's navigator, is one of my favorite characters of all time. And though I've shifted away from using this character to represent my online identity, and towards Roxy Proxy as a more unique and identifiable name, I've continued to express just how much this game means to me, and I've never given up on the possibility of a Nintendo Switch port. Well, after years of consistently begging Nintendo under every direct announcement since the 35th anniversary, here it is. Super Mario Galaxy 2 on Nintendo Switch, released physically as part of a bundle, digitally as a standalone title, and enhanced for Nintendo Switch 2. We did it, Lubba Nation! Someday I'd like to do an in-depth review of these games, both the originals and the Switch remasters, but today I'm focused on one thing, and one thing only: Lubba lore. If there's one complaint everyone shares about Super Mario Galaxy 2, one complaint that's strong enough to turn someone away from the game entirely, it's the weaker tone and narrative when compared to the first entry. And of course, Nintendo was never going to directly address the tonal gap between Galaxies 1 and 2. We're long past the days of Nintendo completely revamping Mario platformers to substantially overhaul or add to the gameplay, which would have been the only way to meaningfully address the issues people have with the game's tone. The abundance of bright, saturated skyboxes, the cheery and upbeat soundtrack, the more lighthearted and less cinematic presentation, and the dissonance between both games' plot. None of which I find to be major issues, personally, as I believe the tonal whiplash between both games, the ethereal beauty and loneliness of the first game versus the lively environments and characters of the second game, gives each entry a more unique identity when playing them back to back. Not to say that Super Mario Galaxy 2 lacks resonant stages entirely, but if any of the points I mentioned here were reason enough for you to quit or skip the game, then unfortunately this Nintendo Switch remaster probably isn't going to change your mind. However, in what might honestly be one of the smartest changes Nintendo has made to any of their legacy games, the Galaxy Collection adds a total of 5 brand new chapters to Rosalina's Storybook. One serving as an epilogue to Rosalina's character arc in the first game, and the remaining 4 telling a brand new story in the second game about a pair of twin Lumas. This is huge. For those who are stuck on the premium price tag, this isn't a selling point to them, it's just something they can look up on YouTube, which is a pretty silly argument to make, in my opinion. For one, YouTube was founded 2 decades ago, so the original storybook can just as easily be discredited using the same logic. But also, I think intent matters just as much as the art itself. The storybook, as with other elements like cutscenes and music, which don't have a direct impact on gameplay, is meant to be experienced in a certain context. Sure, you could read the storybook divorced from the context of Super Mario Galaxy, but its emotional impact is strengthened by the game's tone and setting, as well as by the fact that exploring a character who experiences tragedy is, to this day, unprecedented for the Super Mario series. I've seen some argue that adding a new storybook to Super Mario Galaxy 2 is unfitting of a game with no narrative, and to that I say, Rosalina's Storybook was the narrative core of Super Mario Galaxy. Looking back at the original game and its implementation of the storybook, we can break it down into 3 components. It serves a diegetic purpose by showcasing Rosalina's motherly demeanor towards the Lumas. It serves a gameplay purpose by providing the player with breaks from regular gameplay that also serve as a reward beyond the typical collectibles. And it serves a narrative purpose by exploring the childhood of Rosalina, clearing the mysterious air around her character and giving a deeper meaning to her actions towards Mario. Now, let's take a look at the storybook in Super Mario Galaxy 2. The first chapter doesn't unlock until after the player collects their first star in World 4, and after collecting one star in each subsequent world, Mario is sent to the engine room to read the next chapter. Due to the stark difference in progression between the first game's domes and the second game's world map, as well as the shorter length of the new storybook, it serves as less of a break for the player, at least in the game's first half, and more of a mark of achievement for clearing each subsequent world as the level design ramps up in difficulty. Whereas Mario would discover new chapters of the first storybook by walking in on Rosalina reading to the Lumas, albeit preceded by a rather blunt notification, Lubba will simply inform Mario that a new chapter has been added to the storybook, which doesn't make sense diegetically. Like, from the character's perspective, how are more pages being added? Lubba also acts confused as to how the storybook even appeared in the engine room in the first place, though due to her tendency to crack a joke whenever something is added to Starship Mario, I'm inclined to believe she's intentionally playing coy with Mario to pique his interest. Oh yeah, Lubba's a woman now. Or has always been a woman? Looking through my original game manual, the only line I can find about Lubba doesn't use any pronouns. However, both the original Super Mario Galaxy 2 website and the trophy description in Super Smash Bros. For Wii U use masculine pronouns for Lubba. Looking at this online game manual for the European version, we see that Lubba is referred to as him. And the Super Mario Wiki says that the game's French and Italian localizations also refer to Lubba as male, whereas the German and Spanish translations refer to her as female. In the original Japanese script, Lumas are rarely referred to with gendered terms, although in an interview with the game's director Yoshiaki Koizumi, he calls Lubba a grandma who rattles off useless things on occasion, before quickly correcting himself, saying, no, I don't know Lubba's gender. And with the introduction of the new storybook in Super Mario Galaxy 2's remaster, Lubba is now consistently referred to as a girl across all regions. As someone who also went by he/him pronouns in the year of our Luma 2010, you can imagine my excitement when I saw everyone realizing they had been misgendering Lubba for years in real time, and either apologizing or making jokes about how the Mario series had gained another trans BBW. I'm not sure I'll ever feel the same unadulterated bliss I did seeing my comfort character become the topic of discussion for a single day. But anyways, back to the storybook. Unfortunately, the diegetic and gameplay aspects of Rosalina's storybook are a tad bit less strong in the second game compared to the first. The inclusion of the storybook feels rather shoehorned in, which I understand is due to the fact that the game was never designed to accommodate this element, but I'd be lying if I said this didn't leave me feeling concerned for its narrative. After all, with only 4 chapters to expand Lubba's character, compared to the now 10 chapters in the original game, the events of her backstory would have to be life-altering to hold a candle to Rosalina. What? Why are you looking at me like that? Oh, you're concerned that this video is going to be biased. A perfectly valid concern, given that I am definitively the strongest Lubba soldier. Well, not to worry, I'm sure you can find another Lubba character analysis by a different Oh, there aren't any other YouTubers insane enough to dedicate over half an hour to discussing this character? Oh well, I guess you'll just have to listen to me glaze Lubba, and maybe you'll become a Lubba soldier by the end of this video, eh? Our story begins with 2 twin Lumas, Mari and Lu, living aboard the Comet Observatory, alongside their other Luma friends and... wait, the Lady of the Shooting Stars. Prior to launch, when this page was only available in Japanese, Rosalina was referred to as the Comet Witch, a term which, to my knowledge, has never appeared anywhere else within the series. But as soon as the page was made available in English and I saw this line, I knew. There's only one character in the entire series that uses this name for Rosalina. There's no other explanation. Nintendo made this game specifically for me. Wild. So this story follows a rather small cast. Rosalina, Lu, who is essentially baby Lubba, and an original character named Mari. With that, let's finally dive into the narrative of Super Mario Galaxy 2, a sentence I literally thought I'd never get to say. Mari and Lou, who are identical in every way save for their personalities, spend all of their time together as children. Mari was impulsive and outgoing, and Lou was shy and introspective, which seems to be an intentional parallel to the Mario brothers, their strong sibling bond, and their respective personalities. A bit of an obvious homage to make given the franchise's ties to the bros, but it's sweet nonetheless. What isn't nearly as sweet, however, is that the inseparable Luma twins have, gasp, been separated. Jesus, it took us what, 7 chapters to get to the "my mother is sleeping underneath a tree" scene. Super Mario Galaxy 2 wastes no time in dropping the player right into the action. I mean, compare the first game's storybook introduction, Peach's letter, playable segment, cutscene, another playable segment, another cutscene, introduction to Lumas, introduction to Rosalina, tutorial level, exposition, to the game's minute-long gameplay tutorial right before the first level. It should come as no surprise then that with just 4 chapters to explore these characters, the new storybook comes in swinging with a rather thought-provoking concept. What is it like to be a Luma whose friend transforms before them? You'd think Super Mario Galaxy would have already tackled this question, but both the storybook and the in-game cutscenes are quick to brush off their respective character sacrifices as a result of Luma transformation, quickly pushing each story along to its happy ending. And, perhaps unsurprisingly, any Luma that transforms in-game has no quarrels with giving up their form for Mario. It's entirely unlike Nintendo to take such a mechanic and invite the player to explore its deeper contextual meaning, which is why this idea works so well as a continuation to Rosalina's storybook. It's a display of nuance and emotion that uses the picture book medium to recontextualize these characters and concepts in a way that Nintendo's design philosophies normally don't allow for. Mari's transformation is described as a burst of light that leaves nothing but stardust in its path, and yeah, these are just star bits. I believe in the first game, right before the credits, Rosalina says to Mario that when stars die, they become stardust, which in turn creates new stars. This is consistent with both the opening of that game, in which the Toads are able to create a power star using star bits, and the next page of this very storybook. However, it raises a ton of questions about the nature of star bits. Why do bosses drop star bits if they aren't stars or star adjacent? Why do Lumas eat what are essentially the ashes of their other fallen Lumas? Why does Rosalina eat star bits, and how does she survive this? Why do stars taste like honey? Is Princess Peach the mother of Rosalina? Just who is this cursor supposed to represent? Yeah, I'm looking at you! The next scene has Rosalina address Lou's confusion. If Lumas are taught that they can become a star to help others, then why did Mari transform for no apparent reason? Rosalina's response is that Mari has left their path, but will always be in their hearts, in case it wasn't clear enough that Mari is, in a sense, dead to Lou and her other friends. The vagueness of that answer implies to me that Rosalina can't find any greater purpose to Mari's transformation either. It's possible that, like how parents downplay the idea of death for young children, she uses the promise of helping others to calm the young Lumas who are not yet on the path of transformation. But no matter how she reframes this fact of life, it will always await each Luma. And no one can be prepared for the pain of a loved one being taken away from their path too soon. Rosalina tells Lou that Mari may return in one day, or 100 years, or 10,000 years. It comes off as Rosalina attempting to console Lou, but all it does is highlight the tragedy at hand. Lumas don't experience time in the same way that we do, but 10,000 years is still an unfathomable amount of time. Such a stretch of time may as well be forever. Lou covers her ears and cries, but the damage has already been done. Mari is gone, possibly for good. Days turn into years, years turn into a century, and after all of that time, Lu was never able to become a star. She held on to her Luma form, wishing that someday Mari would return to her, and they could live the rest of their days like they had before, together. Maybe it's just because I've known and loved this character for so long, but fuck, this hits hard. I think it's a damn accomplishment to create such an immersive feeling of loss and grief in a single chapter of what is essentially a children's picture book. Here, we see the first of the 5 stages of grief, denial, in full effect. Despite not knowing if or when her twin will return, Lu doesn't let go of the false hope that, should she stay the same Luma, and should Mari reappear in her original form, life can carry on the way it always had before. Yet, after living this way for 100 years, Lu ultimately decides that a Luma who cannot transform doesn't have much of a use. Yes, I noticed the implication here, and no, I'm not okay. Lu decides that the answer to her existential crisis is to build a spaceship and embark on a journey across the stars. And here we get a pretty interesting lore detail, the original design of Lubba's starship before it was destroyed in Bowser's rampage. Am I the only one who didn't realize the top of Starship Mario was meant to resemble the bow of an actual ship? I just thought they put some railing behind the wheel so the player wouldn't get confused and run across the whole planet. With the reveal of Lubba's preliminary design for the starship, it's now blatant that her idea of a spaceship is a literal ship lodged inside of a planetoid, which is honestly funny as hell, but I also think that when placed next to the Comet Observatory, it serves as an intriguing parallel between the two architects. Rosalina, who once lived a normal human life and thus gets her motherly instincts from her desire to be reunited with her own mother, created a rather expansive and intricate recreation of a human home to raise her star children in. One that, when given the mobility of a spacecraft, captures an entirely different vibe to the other interplanetary vessels of fiction. Lubba's starship similarly breaks the conventions of traditional spacecraft, though it arguably does a better job of representing outer space, given its shape, gravitational pull, and mobility. However, given the context of its creation, it comes across as messy. A hasty mishmash of two concepts which are foreign to the young Lu, a planet-sized contraption she created to run away from her past. And yet, throughout the main game, Mario and Lubba amass a group of willing passengers who make Starship Mario their home, creating a sense of security amidst the chaos and attracting even more guests aboard. If the Comet Observatory is a home that forms a family, then Starship Mario is a family that forms home. Several more centuries pass for Lu, who is still desperately hoping to cross paths with Mari once again. On this page, we can see that she has undergone a rather drastic transformation in that time, shifting hue from a soft blue to a deep purple. I was curious to see whether this aesthetic change represented anything about Lu's character arc, so I did some digging and came across this piece from the London Image Institute, Color Psychology: How Do Colors Affect Mood and Emotions? The London Image Institute dubs blue the color of trust, serenity, and peace. All words that accurately describe the relationship between Mari and Lu and the path they once traveled together. It can suggest loyalty and integrity, a feeling that I'm sure was mutual between the twins, but it can also represent conservatism and predictability, which I think describes rather acutely Lu's dependency on the status quo that her relationship with Mari established. Their sibling bond was a constant that defined Lu's life for so long that, even after centuries have passed, the lack thereof still shakes her to her very core. Therefore, it would only be natural that such a strong desire would manifest in her physical form. Purple is the color of imagination and spirituality, inspiring high ideals. Could this perhaps be foreshadowing towards the character arc that Lu will undergo in the next chapter and a half? Jesus, I yapped so hard even I thought this story was way longer. Much like Lubba herself, the different interpretations of purple also make up two sides of one coin. It can be creative and individual, or immature and impractical. In a rather prophetic line, they also call the color an introspective tone. Maybe all this color talk is just confirmation bias, and I'm picking up on details that were never intentional, but it's fun to think about nonetheless. The next page depicts Lu having parked her spaceship on a planet with trees reminiscent of Rosalina's homeworld, watching a shooting star pass by, a rather striking visual of the passage of time. And, speaking of Rosalina, having happened upon her numerous times, Lu never did see Mari alongside her. After 1,000 years have passed, all of Lu's friends have transformed into stars, leaving her completely alone. It's then that we see Lu exhibit the second stage of grief, anger. Taking her frustration out on Mari, Lu imagines a scenario in which she's forgotten completely about her, frolicking with star bunnies on a far-off planet. The official website for Harvard Medical School uses feeling anger towards God or a higher spiritual power as one example of a manifestation of grief, which I feel is the closest fit for the supernatural nature of Lumas, as creatures which can, supposedly, return unscathed from a change as drastic as becoming a star. As we near the end of Chapter 2, let's continue down the stages of grief. Next is bargaining, the point at which one attempts to negotiate or make compromises with themselves to cope with the lack of control they have over their loss. Speaking from experience, grief at its worst is the pit in your stomach when you exhaust all possible options, lose all hope in improving your situation, and resent yourself for not doing things differently, for not sacrificing enough. When your heart is burning with guilt, and your soul is weighed down by regret, a dark thought begins to cross your mind, a belief that in your broken state, you only have one thing left to bargain with. Lu found the loneliness unbearable. The truth was, she really did want to become a star, because that's what would save her from these feelings. She would become one right now if it meant she could see Mari again. Lu strained, shook her body, and struggled to turn into a star, but she couldn't do it. Fuck. This hits like a freight train. This hit me like a freight train. And not just because Lubba is my comfort character. Super Mario Galaxy spends far more time on Rosalina's search for her mother than it does on the reveal that she had passed away on her home planet. And Rosalina isn't given very much time to grieve or express her feelings on the matter, as our storybook is just as much about the Lumas as it is about her. Every obstacle she encounters serves as a stepping stone in her transformation into the Keeper of the Cosmos, and every action she takes to overcome them is in service of her found family, the Lumas. Lu, on the other hand, was grief-stricken from a young age, left with no greater purpose to preoccupy her, and an endless amount of time to stew in her feelings of despair. It would only make sense then that someone who had lived without reason for such a long time would bargain with their life, or to be more specific, the form they had assumed for their entire existence up to that point, in order to be reunited with a loved one. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say the word on YouTube, but we're all thinking it, right? The last resort. I am unfortunately all too familiar with thoughts of this nature, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I broke down crying as I imagined Lu violently shaking, pouring her entire spirit and being into forfeiting her life as a Luma, because she had given up all hope that anything else could free her from the soul-crushing waves of depression, the fourth stage of grief. Thankfully, we know that Lu gets to have her happy ending. I know, shocker. So, let's wipe the star bits from our eyes and soldier on. Stage 5 is Acceptance. Chapter 1 sets up our key characters and the struggles that they, primarily Lu, will overcome. Chapter 2 focuses on Lu and her struggle with grief, ending at her lowest point. Following the traditional 3-act structure, we can safely assume that Chapter 3 will cover Stage 5, thus concluding Lubba's character arc. So, can this chapter do justice to her character as portrayed in Galaxy 2? There's only one way to find out. After exhausting herself in her failed attempt to transform into a star, Lu once again finds herself in the presence of the Lady of the Shooting Stars, and after 1,000 years to reflect on Lu's situation, Rosalina is finally ready to try consoling the poor Luma again. Whereas Rosalina's dialogue in Chapter 1 was more vague in its details and stated matter-of-factly, her words here are filled with a sense of warmth and determination. Rather than explaining Mari's transformation logically, deflecting in order to make her departure about the good she'll do for other Lumas, she appeals to Lu's emotions, her humanity, by reassuring her that Mari does think of Lu, and she does know where she is. She reminds Lu that she and Mari are twin stars, born of the same stardust. Now, I want to talk about this illustration that accompanies Rosalina's reminiscence on her own search for a special someone. Specifically, the young Rosalina design, which is identical to the one used in the original storybook. Well, of course it would be identical, it is Rosalina's storybook, you may say, but I personally think it's a pretty big deal that we have in-game confirmation that Rosalina, the Lady of the Shooting Stars, and the girl in the original storybook are one and the same. After all, none of the characters in the first storybook were referred to by name, and I always figured that was an intentional detail. It may be obvious who the young girl is to the player, but to the young Lumas having the story read to them, maybe not so much. And the decision to give all the characters in Galaxy 2's storybook names was interesting in itself, but perhaps that's just because it'd be weird to introduce an original character and not give them a name. Again, we'll get to her in a minute. Reflecting on her past, her journey, her loss, her family, Rosalina reaffirms that though Mari may be lost at this moment, she'll find her way back so long as Lu acts as her lighthouse. And as she's inspiring Lu to keep the flames of hope burning bright, the storybook describes her eyes as kind, a detail I find odd considering adult Rosalina hasn't shown her eyes once, and in the prior scene young Rosalina's eyes were rather sad, so I don't think they intended this face to mirror her present expression. Perhaps this is just one detail Nintendo decided to leave to readers for interpretation. With a reinvigorated sense of hope, Lu's very stardust began to glow, hitting her with a wave of nostalgia. This feeling of togetherness, one that she hadn't felt since Mari left her, causes something inside of her to change. Her eyes also glow in a vibrant cyan hue, reflected in her final design, or I suppose first design would be more accurate. Regardless, I think it's a very cute detail, highlighting how the people we love fundamentally shape who we are even after losing them and learning to move on. The next scene shows us Lu and her newfound crew of Lumas in present day, presumably just before the events of the game, as the Starship still resembles a boat-planetoid hybrid. We can see one Luma dusting the captain's quarters, and another wiping the interior windows. This revised Starship design clearly looks cleaner than the last, when it was covered in these dark spots that resemble moss or perhaps patches of chipped paint. The text describes Lu as dependable in nature and impressive in stature, as all captains should be. These are both things that you could reasonably assume about Lubba's personality given the things she does in-game, though it's odd to not highlight her easygoing and comedic tendencies. Not that the storybook needed to have this MCU-esque dialogue to get across that she's a funny gal, but given that the storybook is written retroactively, it is an interesting decision nonetheless. There's a similar slight gap in personality between Rosalina as she's depicted in the original storybook and as she's depicted in Super Mario Galaxy, the former being more extroverted and the latter being more introverted. This used to really bother me for some reason, but in retrospect, I think I was just being stupid. I mean, it's not as if I couldn't fill in the blanks, I just felt that Rosalina's personality during cutscenes didn't quite do the storybook version of her character justice. Back to Galaxy 2, this discrepancy between the impressive Captain Lu and the easygoing, humble Lubba is a little bit more difficult to look past. Though I can reasonably believe that Lubba has mellowed out between this scene and the beginning of Super Mario Galaxy 2, I'm not sure that the character described here would simply relinquish the title of Captain to Mario and push all of the decision making onto him. I want to clarify that expanding Lubba's character this successfully 15 years after the fact is an impressive feat in itself, but I'd be remiss if I left any of my thoughts out of this video. And finally, this character arc ends on one of the most thug gangster ass frames I've ever seen. Holy hell, it's badass. I'm Lubba, one half of the Twin Star children. I carry the fire of hope across the galaxies. Chills. I appreciate that Lubba acknowledges how Mari has fundamentally shaped who she is. I for one think that's a healthier outlook on learning to accept loss than treating it like the definitive end to the grieving process. It's just a shame that that doesn't carry into the main game. Again, I know the game wasn't made to accommodate Rosalina's storybook, but maybe they could have had Lubba mention Mari in the final cutscene where Rosalina brings up special someones. That would have made that final scene hit even harder than it already does with the added context. Now, I want to talk about the name change real quick. As if I needed more evidence that Lubba is a beautiful transgender woman, now you're telling me she has preferred pronouns and a dead name? In all seriousness, it's just really cool to have Lu represent her transformation into a more confident, hopeful Luma with this name change. Though the cynical side of me thinks this was only written into the story so as to not spoil the reveal that it is in fact about Lubba, as if Lubba's status as a more niche character makes her too unmarketable compared to two seemingly generic Lumas. I don't know, if it seems like my thoughts are contradicting here, then that's just because I'm of two different minds when it comes to the name change. To close my thoughts on Lubba's character arc, I'm just so incredibly happy to see the mainline Mario series tackle topics like depression, grief, and this, of all things, in a way that's arguably even more profound than what was written in the original Super Mario Galaxy. To many others, this new storybook is nothing more than 5-ish minutes of superfluous content attempting to justify a 100% price increase. A sentiment which I fully understand and in fact encourage in this modern era of rising prices and stagnating quality, especially when it comes to remakes and remasters, especially from this company. But given that this is a continuation of my favorite Mario story, adapting my favorite character, addressing my single biggest complaint with my favorite game, yeah, I have no regrets adding this port to my physical collection. Wait, what do you mean there's still another chapter? With Lubba's character arc complete, Chapter 4 shifts its focus onto Mari. I have a premonition that writing about this character will be a bit more difficult. After all, we're talking about a character who the Mario Wiki recognizes as being important enough to warrant its own page, but not having enough information to start writing said page. I suppose I could draw some comparisons between Mari and Mario, though this thread I found on Twitter So let's address the elephant in the room. Mari currently isn't a star and could make her way back to Lubba, as Rosalina suggested. The text says that she's awoken in different worlds too many times. Does she transform from star to Luma when she's awake and back into a star when she's asleep? And is the universe literally separated into worlds as the level select for Galaxy 2 suggests? I don't know. Just thought it was worth bringing these questions up, I guess. Assuming this chapter also takes place in the present, Mari has been falling in and out of slumber for a millennia, screwing with her sense of time. What remains of her memories is now a scrambled mess. She recalls gorging on star bits, drowning in honey, and being trapped in a cage. This, along with a current design resembling the standard Lumily design, has led to speculation that the events of the storybook will tie into Nintendo's next theatrical release, the Super Mario Galaxy movie. I don't think the Mario series has ever tackled a multimedia narrative like this before, though it can't be ruled out that, like with the release of Super Mario Bros. Wonder and the Super Mario Galaxy remasters, coinciding with the release of the first and second Illumination Mario films respectively, that the new film could also tie back into the Super Mario Galaxy games. Besides, if there ever were a Nintendo game that could work in such a context, it'd be Super Mario Galaxy, since any discrepancies between game and film could be explained away by each continuity taking place in another cycle of the same universe. Although, let's not get ahead of ourselves, it's also entirely possible that Nintendo will either leave us on a cliffhanger, or wait to continue the story in a future game project. At this point, I'll accept any outcome that leads to us seeing more of these characters. Mari comes across a planet in ruins, inhabited by a group of burnt-out little cinders on a crumbling planetoid. She attempts to warn them, though they seem to keep their distance with her out of fear, so she sends them off with the phrase, "May the stars shine down on you." This is something that Rosalina says numerous times across both Super Mario Galaxy games, and I assume Mari uses this line here simply to suggest that she remembers more than she thinks she does. It's not long after that Mari runs into a comet, with a face resembling a thwomp. I suppose this is a good time to mention that the background footage I've been using for each chapter is of the galaxies that unlock each respective one. Supermassive Galaxy, or Sweet Mystery Galaxy, both playful galaxies, precede Chapter 1, which has a melancholy feel. Space Storm Galaxy, an area with a threatening presence, precedes Chapter 2, in which Lou is at most threat of being consumed by her grief. Melty Monster Galaxy, a bombastic level that amps up the heat, precedes Chapter 3, which gives us a look at Lubba's fire of hope. And Mario Squared Galaxy, the first level of the mysterious and legendary world S, precedes Chapter 4, which explores the mystery of Mari's whereabouts. And it's in that galaxy that we see Lil Cinders. Not only that, it's not much further into World S that Mario visits Stone Cyclone Galaxy, an area with lots of thwomps and a cyclone in the center that somewhat resembles the tail of a comet. Could it be that the first half of Chapter 4 takes place in that world of legends? Well, the clouds on the world map aren't white like they are here, so it's anybody's guess, really. Back to Mari, she comments on the comet's speed, saying that moving in a hurry is a great way to experience life given how short it is. The comet chastises the Luma, asking her who she thinks she is and where she came from. Mari's response is that she doesn't remember because it doesn't matter enough to remember, which shocks the comet. "It's pointless to remember stuff. We just repeat the same cycles over and over. So just forget about me, and I'll forget about you. And then we'll both be on to the next thing." A nihilistic sentiment that only strengthens her connection to the character from the Super Mario Bros. Movie. But it also has really sad implications. For one, it confirms Lubba's fears that her twin has completely forgotten about her in another world. But also, whereas Lubba faced great adversary and came out of it a strong and mature Luma, Mari's spotty memory and consciousness lead her to passively let things happen to her, meaning she doesn't learn or grow from her actions. The comet corroborates my point here, telling the 1,000-year-old Luma to go home to her mama. A word which sounds familiar to Mari, but the meaning slips her mind, so she ignores it and dozes off yet again. When she next wakes up, she finds herself in a world which is filled with complete darkness, due to the fact that no stars have been born yet. Though she will soon be a star herself, so she doesn't mind waiting for something to take form. Mari recalls being told that Lumas can transform in order to help a special someone, though this still doesn't help her recall her past. It's only after seeing a faint purple glow in the distance that Mari remembers her special someone. What I find interesting is that the writers take the time to specify that Mari prefers the darkness of space to the light, which she finds to be bothersome. In Chapter 2, Lou is desperately wishing to become a star. Only a few pages after the storybook tells us that she'd prefer to be a Luma. But here, Mari takes quite the interest in the light that appears literally one page after we're told that she prefers the darkness. Could it be that as Lou's shifting ideals represented her shift from restlessness to hopelessness, Mari is also experiencing a shift in personality? Perhaps her new sense of hope alludes to a new character arc for the Luma League character in the next Mario movie. Or it could be that she's finally coming into her own as a Lumali after being without direction or meaning for so long. Whatever the case, Mari once again transforms into a star, vowing to reunite with her other half no matter how long it takes. When the stardust settles, all that remains is darkness. And though the story has reached its end, we have one more illustration to look at, the Luma twins staring into the night sky. It's honestly beautiful to see just how far these two have come in such a short amount of time from our perspective. Lu, the shy Luma, became Lubba, the strong-headed captain who brings hope and friendship across the cosmos. And Mari, the impulsive Luma, became a model Lumali, making an informed decision based on the teachings of Rosalina in order to help her special someone. And even Rosalina grows by the end of the storybook, honing in on her motherly instincts to help Lubba overcome her feelings of grief and depression. When it comes to character development, Yoshiaki Koizumi has succeeded on all fronts, and I honestly couldn't be happier with the results. One thing I've come to accept while writing this script is that Nintendo's decision to not include the new storybook chapters in the physical release of Rosalina Storybook kind of makes sense in a roundabout way. The single new chapter in Galaxy 1 is entirely unnoteworthy in my personal opinion, apart from canonizing a fan-favorite piece of Super Mario Odyssey concept art. The only thing it adds to the story is that the Lumas are on a journey to find their birthplace, replacing a satisfying ending to a self-contained story with one that leaves me with more questions than answers. And the Lubba chapters, as much as I adore them, also leave much to be desired in terms of closure. These aren't flaws per se, so long as Nintendo plans on properly resolving these loose threads in a future project. But the original storybook was the franchise's lightning in a bottle. It's a story that works just as well in the context of a legitimate children's storybook, as it did all those years ago as the core of Rosalina's character and identity as portrayed in that original game. There's also one challenge that Galaxy 2 Storybook would face if it were to be adapted into a real-life product. Whereas Rosalina's grief is written to be digestible for a young audience, as you'd expect from a picture book, Lubba's take on that same topic focuses heavily on the impact it has on her life, and the effort it takes for her to overcome it. I don't think particularly young children would be able to absorb the nuances of these characters' feelings nearly as well, at least not without a parent or guardian who's willing to explain these topics to them. I bring this up because these elements that stray away from the core identity of the original Rosalina storybook, its self-contained nature and all-ages approach, make the Super Mario Galaxy 2 storybook a perfect continuation for young adults who grew up with the plot and character of these games, and they build upon this duology's greatest strength, that being how unique these games' interpretations of space exploration manage to be while using the same core ideas and mechanics. This does have the side effect of Galaxy 2 now having a tonal discrepancy between both its predecessor and its own story expansion, but in this modern era of Nintendo remasters that have to remain near identical to their original releases, at the expense of being labeled lazy and soulless, I'm glad they gave serious storytelling in a mainline Mario game another chance. I went into this video expecting to prove something, that my devotion to this once forgotten character made me uniquely qualified to uncover every hidden message and nuance within these pages. But in my research, I was shocked to find people engaging with this character in ways that I hadn't considered, including trans peers who viewed Lubba as an allegory for transitioning, disabled people who felt seen in her perseverance in spite of her inability to transform, and devoted fans who drew parallels between Lubba and Luigi and Mario that had completely evaded me. It was as if something finally clicked for this fandom, which had become increasingly dismissive of Galaxy 2 for being a mere gameplay expansion, and that's when it hit me. Super Mario Galaxy makes a bold statement about the vast universe we live in, prevalent in every aspect of its development, from level design to art direction to writing. Its sequel, on the other hand, uses its most basic foundation to finally craft a consistently outstanding platformer from start to finish, but it leaves nothing to interpretation. What you see is what you get. A Mario game set in space with a silly Billy to keep you company. In my mind, Super Mario Galaxy didn't leave much room for interpretation because its atmosphere and narrative are set in stone, But ironically, I've come to find that the inverse is true. It's because Galaxy 1 establishes an intricate and deliberate tone that so many people latch onto this game and its original characters and project their own feelings onto them. Had Lubba been thrown into spin-offs following the release of Galaxy 2, playing as her would be no different than playing as the Sprixie Princess or Prince Florian. Just a blank slate who does exactly as much as their origin game requires of them in order to set up the game's mechanics and hub area. As soon as Lubba had a conflict to overcome, people could latch onto this character and form different ideas of who she is. And it highlights the simple beauty of Super Mario Galaxy. I could replay, say, Super Mario 3D Land 100 times in a row, and every experience would be the exact same at best, or increasingly boring at worst. But there's a human aspect to Super Mario Galaxy that makes it a timeless game. As we grow as people, our ideals and worldview change, so we never interpret the story or the quiet sadness of space in quite the same way. Oh shit, that's exactly what Rosalina tells us at the end of that game. Huh. Super Mario Galaxy 2 might be the same great platformer every time I replay it, but knowing now that I can always revisit the engine room and relive that story, I'll always have a different takeaway every time I beat this game. That one little addition, that ember of hope buried deep within the core of Starship Mario, changes everything.